you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, you know, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. You know, we pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown, you know. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. You know, we would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities. See what was going on, you know? Yeah, now, whatever that comes from, I don't know. But it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life. So that was an escape, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Costa, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. Hello, wonderful Cuttlefish. Welcome back to Season 3, Episode 10 of the Floaties for Krakens podcast. And happy last day of November! Golly, we are literally 1 month away from 2025. Isn't that something? And what a year it's been. No matter what kind of year you've had, tough, beautiful, happy, sad, confusing, complex, breathtaking, meaningful, I hope that you are proud of all that you've accomplished. You are super freaking cool, and you did it, and you made it, and we are so happy that you're here. And I am so freaking excited to bring to you all part 2 of our super freaking incredible Silk and Sinew Special. And don't worry, in case you missed part 1, which you should totally go back and watch it, okay? Either way, I'll catch you up. So a few months ago, I was in contact with the lovely Kristy P. Kulski, who is an immensely talented Korean-American writer and just a powerhouse of an artist. I will say it once, I will say it again. She is incredible. Well, she mentioned an anthology that she was working on that is on the horizon, and she came up with the amazing idea of hosting a few different specials to promote not only the amazing piece of work itself, but the brilliant authors behind it. In May of 2025, Kristy's anthology titled Silk and Sinew, a collection of folk horror from the Asian Diaspora, will premiere for the world to see. With a special thanks to Bad Hand Books, Silk and Sinew will tease forth folk horror rooted in the experience of the Asian diaspora. From lengths of muscle and vein, ground bones, endless ropes of sinew, it is with our bodies folk horror is woven. The anthology will include stories, poetry, and essays on history and folklore. Now, for today's episode, I introduce to you 3 groundbreaking authors that will be featured in this collection. Genevieve Flynn, she, her, Jen, otherwise known as J.A.W. McCarthy, she, her, and Chris Hahn, he, him. All of their bios will be in the links below, by the way. And thanks to Kristy's own brilliant brain, this episode explores guilt in the world of Asian folk monsters and how difficult it is when it is part of your cultural past. Oh, and you may be curious about the title. Well, there happens to be a form of therapy called Gestalt therapy. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. According to mentalhealth.com, Gestalt therapy is a form of psychotherapy that emphasizes personal responsibility and self-awareness, focusing on the individual's experience in the present moment. It uses techniques such as the empty chair to facilitate awareness of feelings, thoughts, and behaviors in the here and now. The goal is to help individuals learn to accept and trust their feelings and experiences, enabling them to find healthier ways to deal with life's challenges. The empty chair technique seems like a way to sit with our most complex parts. A task that's really, really hard, but perhaps necessary, perhaps freeing. Kristy, Genevieve, Jen, and Chris, thank you all so freaking much for the amazing work that you create every day and for being kind enough to speak with me on the show. I'm so excited for the world to see your collection, and I'm just so thankful that you each pull up chairs for us weird kids to sit at the table. Just a quick content warning for this episode. In the following interview, there will be mentions and discussions of racism, bullying, animal death, body horror, gore, death, the taking of one's own life, sexual abuse, mental health difficulties, and generational trauma in this episode. So please, do whatever you need to do to feel safe. Well, without further ado, ladies and cuttlefish, let me introduce to you the empty chair technique for folk monsters. Great. Well, hello again. Genevieve, Jen, Chris, hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know everybody is probably in a different time zone right now in this moment, but welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have each of you today.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having
Camille.
us, Camille.
Thanks for
Oh,
hosting us.
thank you. This is about to be a very fun, I think, discussion and exploration, and just getting to know each of you is going to be so much fun. You all write incredible work, and just have such amazing stories within you, and I'm so excited to explore monstrosity with all of you. I think it's going to be such a great time.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Mhm.
Before I go any further, and I can call on one of you, or anybody who's willing to go first can go first. I was wondering if each of you could go ahead and state your name, who you are, your pronouns, and just a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind. If anybody's eager.
I'll jump in because that's always awkward when nobody does it.
Perfect.
I'm Genevieve Flynn. I'm Chinese. I was born in Malaysia, but I now call Brisbane, Australia home. I'm a dark fiction author, editor, and poet. And with the award-winning author Lee Murray, I edited Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women. And it kind of feels like it started a bit of groundswell of interest in Asian women's dark fiction, and that's so I've won a couple of awards: the Bram Stoker, Shirley Jackson Aurealis, and a Brave New Weird award. And I'm shortlisted for a couple of other awards. And writing about Chinese and Malaysian monsters is one of my favorite things. So that's me.
That's so amazing. Lee Murray was just on the show not too long ago, and man, that book is something else. You are something else, Genevieve. That's so wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm
it
so
was
excited.
it was the authors, the stories that everybody submitted and pulled together. It was just one of those lightning in a bottle things that just came out of a chance meeting, and it started this incredible movement. Yeah.
So necessary.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
I guess I'll jump in next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Christopher Han. I live in New Zealand and of Korean descent, so I'm a Kiwi Korean, so to speak, and I'm Genevieve's neighbor. It's quite close by at the corner of the globe there. I write mostly horror. Working on my debut novel, fingers crossed, at the moment.
Yeah.
Just because Genevieve mentioned it, Black Cranes, that you had edited with Lee Murray. I understand that was from Raw Dog Screaming Press, wasn't it?
It
Didn't get the
was,
chance to read it, but
yeah, it was originally published by Omnium Gatherum, and
oh,
then
okay, I see.
we got it republished with Raw Dog Screaming Press. So
Right, right.
it's yeah.
Because yeah, I had my first short story published in Raw Dog's Anthology last year, so that's how I sort of got my career started, so to speak. So that was very exciting. So yeah, hoping to write more horror and weird things in the near future.
Chris, that's wonderful. That's so cool. Congratulations on your first
Thank you.
publication. And so I think you mentioned before, this will be your
Second,
second publication.
correct. That's right.
Is there anything at all? I mean, I know you can't give it away. Is there anything at all you can tell us about this special little novel that you're working on?
As it happens, it's got to do with a lot of Korean occult, shamanistic, cosmic horror kind of stuff.
Oh,
Great
There's
words.
a creature there that kills a lot of people, so that's about
Mm,
as much I'll give away. But yeah, very excited. I'm almost halfway through the first, well, not second draftish, so hopefully
that's awesome.
I'll be shopping it around soon.
Well, best of luck. I'm sure it's going to be
Thank you.
picked up so quickly. Oh, that's so freaking awesome.
Fingers
That's
crossed.
great. Yeah. And Jen, last but certainly not least.
Well, hi. I'm J.A.W. McCarthy, and my pronouns are she, her, and you can call me Jen. I am the author of Sometimes We're Cruel, which was my debut short horror fiction. Genevieve's got it.
Yes!
I
I
loved
love
it.
it.
Oh,
I
thank
love
you.
it.
And I'm also the author of Sleep Alone, my novella about basically a queer succubi band on the run and their merch girl. And both are actually they're both award nominated. They were both finalists for the Shirley Jackson Award, and Sleep Alone was also a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award. And I've got stories all over the place in lots of magazines, podcasts, as well as short nonfiction. I'm of Thai descent, and I live in the Pacific Northwest with my spouse and my cats, the Pacific Northwest USA.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, your work is incredible. Oh my, clearly, Jen, with all the award nominations, the wins, everything, you're so incredible. And you
Oh, thank
bring
you.
such a beautifully unique quality to the world. All of you do, right? To the world of horror and what that means. And I'm so thrilled to have you here. I'm so excited to pick each of your brains. This is about to be a very fun conversation. But Jen, since we just finished introducing you, what brought you to the world of the spooky?
Well, I think it was a combo of things. My parents definitely never limited what I read or watched. So I definitely maybe got into horror a little too young, reading Stephen King and Anne Rice and that kind of thing. And I also had a neighbor who was a little bit older than me, and she used to invite me over to watch horror movies. She was an absolute horror movie fanatic. So that was, again, too young probably, but it was a lot of fun. And then also my mom is a storyteller, and that's where my interest in Thai folklore comes from.
It's so beautiful when that becomes a part of your fabric, right? Like horror
Hmm.
stories in general, but legend telling or myth, right? In the world of
Yeah.
folklore, it sticks with you. I mean, you're born with it, right? We're all born with folklore.
Hmm.
That's something that connects all of us. But it's such a beautiful nostalgic thing. Um, and I love that you said you were introduced to horror too young. I'm sure all of us on this call could probably relate
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
Probably too
Yep.
dangerously. Like, oh my God, mom and dad, what were you guys doing? But in the best
Yeah.
way, in the best freaking way.
Yep.
Do you remember, Jen, any specific stories that stuck with you from your mom?
She would just make up stories, really. When I was
Yes.
little, she would read to me, but she would also tell her own stories. And she loved to draw and illustrate her stories while she was telling them. And she told all kinds of things, fantasy stuff, princesses and castles and things like that.
That's
So I think,
incredible.
yeah, I think she raised me to be a storyteller and an artist. I think that was
Oh,
set from birth, you know. So I'm very grateful for that.
that's beautiful. What a lovely memory to have with your
Yeah.
mom and a beautiful connection. And you're passing on the tradition, which I think is really, really
Yep.
awesome.
Mhm.
Well, Chris, what about yourself? How did horror come into play?
Very similar to Jen. Started way too early. Probably shouldn't have. Mom tried to limit some of that stuff, but Dad was just like, yeah, whatever. It's just you're allowed to watch Ju-on. You're 7 years old.
Oh my god.
I think I think what's
Jeez.
I think what's very clear cut for me. I'm not sure if you've know about it, but there's the old version of Disney's Fantasia back from 1940. And
Yes.
there's a segment at the end called Night on Bald Mountain, and that's when the demon comes out and summons all these ghosts. And I think it's in the public sphere now, so you can kind of check it out on YouTube or whatever. But even as an adult, that thing is pretty terrifying. But
Yes.
5-year-old me saw that and thought, yeah, that's my favorite. That's what I like. So I think it was pretty clear from a young age. I was into the spooky. Um, Favorite story growing up was The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh,
And that was actually the English version. I couldn't read it when I was very young. So for some reason, they had a children's picture book version of it, which my parents got me.
oh my
Um,
gosh.
and yeah, the things that happen in the story is pretty it's pretty out there. But that was also my favorite of the collection. Um, with the wife getting killed and they're buried in the wall with the cat and all that pleasant stuff. So yeah, I think I was very drawn to it, and then haven't really changed since.
That's incredible. I love that those specific stories or monsters, right, in that way
Yeah.
were your origin story.
Mm.
That's really,
Yeah.
really cool. And I love too, like Fantasia's something else. It really is. It's such an overwhelming feeling, no matter what, right? As a young kid,
Yeah,
and so much
definitely.
creativity and just so much flowing.
Mm, mm.
And I totally see why that creature left something, sparked something in you.
Yeah.
And Edgar Allan Poe too. What a of course brilliant story to latch on. Very dark, Chris. Obviously,
Yeah, very
very
dark.
dark. Um, but brilliant.
Mm,
Really,
mm.
really cool. Genevieve, how about yourself?
I grew up in Malaysia and traveled around a few countries because of my dad's work, and I sort of picked up a lot of the different mythologies. But my mum also, I think she was trying to encourage us to read and things, and she would buy us books on mythology and lore and things like that. And some of those are dark, some of those are so dark. So that's
Yeah.
probably a start. But similar to Jen and Christopher, my dad used to we used to watch this is probably dating me, but like Dirty Harry and Charles Bronson movies, and I was way too young for those, but you just kind of sit and watch and take it all in. But the I think the supernatural is very much part of daily life in Malaysia and also for Chinese people. So my my nanny, used to point to the geckos in the ceiling and say, if you're naughty, they'll come and get you. So that kind of thing where it's because we were talking about animism before, where everything is thought to have a spirit or a soul, and it could be something good or it could be something malicious. So that way you're just surrounded by the supernatural. It's just taken that it's just part of how you navigate life, and you just have to appease certain things. You have to just survive certain things, just get through them.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but that there is that tendency, particularly for Malaysia and for Chinese, for China, that there's been so much migration, and Malaysia is a real melting pot. So I think we kind of take bits and pieces from different cultures, different religions and mythologies, and mash it all together to whatever is workable. Because I remember my Catholic grandmother used to go to work, used to go to church, but she also carried, this is kind of gross, sorry if anyone's eating,
Go for it.
the dried penis of a black dog in her purse to ward off evil spirits. So
Yes.
it's that everything goes kind of thing, like you pull from everything. So that's kind of how I think my approach to the supernatural has come about as well. Where I grew up on Greek myths. I grew up reading about Korean mythology because we lived in South Korea for 18 months. So all of that is kind of in my brain matter rolling around
Yeah.
up there. Yeah.
I
So,
think you said it perfectly, right? It's supernatural. It's just natural. It comes with
yeah.
breathing, like on your first day alive, right? Like it's just there. It's a part of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
Oh
don't
my
stop and
gosh.
think. It's like, oh my God, what do I actually believe in? And what have I grown up with? It just seems like, well, that's just the way the world works. The
Yeah.
supernatural is everywhere, and it is something just to navigate or survive sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I love the idea of horror being a communicative vessel for survival on so many different terms, right? Like I think so many of us see ourselves for the first time in horror, right? Something we can relate to, a fear that we can finally either illustrate, right, or recognize or define. And I think it's so special when little kids. Yeah, I know it gets dark, and I know it can be pretty heavy, but I think it's very special when little ones attach to horror at such a young age, because they can find such safety in it. And I think it's wonderful, Genevieve, that like your family encouraged it and talked about it, and it was,
Yeah.
it was there, right?
Oh,
That's
I
great.
don't think my mum intended for me to become a horror writer. I think
Yeah.
she was hoping for, the typical Asian doctor, lawyer, dentist. So my one of my brothers is a dentist, so at least like 1 out of 3 did what they were supposed to.
Yeah, he can do it. It's fine. And I have to ask too, because I've never heard of this specific tradition. What did the dried penis, like why specifically was that used to ward off evil?
Certain beings or certain animals and things that they have um, that have a certain symbolism
Yeah.
in Malay culture, I think. Like when my dad used to tell the story of if he would go out into the rainforest with a Malay guide to go hunting, that if they wanted to drink from the stream that was crossing, the guide would say stop, and he would place his barang, his big machete, upstream, and then he would say, well, now it's cleared the water, it's safe to drink. It probably
Right.
wasn't, but
Right.
that kind of thing, that perhaps at one time somebody did that, and it meant that the stream was clear, so maybe something happened with the black dog. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think certain creatures have meaning, and certain things have have the are thought to have the ability to either cause harm or to be helpful.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah.
That's so powerful. I love that. I love that she carried it with her. I think that
Yeah.
is so incredible.
I never got the chance to ask her why. My mom just brought this up at the dinner table one day. It's like, your grandmother.
By
And I
the
was like,
way,
what? What? And she's like, yeah, she used to carry it around. Yeah, so
gosh.
these things just crop up. And sometimes it doesn't seem like it's believable, but they're like, yeah, no, this is just something that they did.
Yeah.
So that, again, the supernatural is just there.
A constant.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's so incredible. Well, Genevieve, how did like writing, right? Like your love for writing also come into the mix? When did you know, like, I want to be an author?
Um, I I read a lot. I think like many authors, and it was that I think that desire to prolong their escape into another world. It's like I've just spent all this time in this wonderful story. I don't want to leave it. I want to continue that feeling of being swept away or being in a different place or a fantasy land. So that
Yeah.
was probably the first inklings that I wanted to write. And and then whether or not I could write horror, I do remember in high school we had to read out work, and I oblivious. I was one of those kids who was always daydreaming, and I read out something, and there was dead silence. And my teacher, my poor teacher, Mrs. Arez, she said, "Oh, that was good." Very, very dark, but good. And I just was not aware of, what I had just done to everybody. So that's probably, I think, my first sign that I wrote horror, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got that physical response from your
Yeah.
class.
Yeah. And not realizing, just because I spent a lot of time in my head and not kind of realizing how other people might see me. I was like, oh, that should have been an inside voice.
No, it shouldn't have. No. It's exactly the reason that voice has led so many people to your work, and arguably like to themselves, right? Like that's what authors do so brilliantly, is they put words on paper that maybe we can't find or don't know about yet, or can't express. And I think it's so amazing that you were like, no, this is just my mind. Like, this is where I live. This is how I express myself. That's powerful. That's really cool.
It's nice to actually be in a community where people say that's cool, instead of it's like, I'm not gonna allow you to mind my children.
Well, they forget about them. Well, Chris, how about yourself? How did writing come into play for you?
I think for me it kind of went full circle. Started writing a lot of stories, pretty dark ones, like Genevieve said, when I was little, and then early 20s, I think I really got into film. So I wanted to be a film director. A lot of young guys want to be film directors. And then I realized, oh, shoot, this is really hard. And you need, like, money, resources, you need crew, you need people.
Sure.
So I sort of fell into writing screenplays after that because, I could do that on my own. And then did that for quite a while. And then it was, I think it was 2020 when COVID hit, and a lot of ups and downs in my life, I think, at that point. And then I kind of thought, look, what I really enjoy doing, both as a hobby and potentially as what I want to pursue as a career that I like. And it kind of set me back to writing prose again. And because I like writing screenplays, it's a lot of fun. But I think with screenplays, you got to be very lean all the time. I'm not sure if people would agree. But I think I'm kind of enjoy what they call purple prose. I'm a bit of a flowery kind of person in writing. So I think that's the path that kind of led me back to writing stories again. And yeah, but like the horror and the creepy, spooky theme was quite constant all the way through. So I just kind of held on to that, I guess. And yeah, here I am in my second little short story published. So very happy.
That's so wonderful. I have never heard that term before, purple prose. I
Purple
think
prose. Yeah, I'm
it's
quite sure
great.
Genevieve and Jen might have heard about it. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
it's usually not a good thing.
I prefer decadent prose.
Decadent prose. That's it.
oh,
Ooh,
that's nice.
Yeah,
that's
I love it. I love to read it. I
beautiful.
love to write it.
I love
Yeah.
that.
No, my husband says, "Oh, I can't read your writing. You write like Hemingway. It's like bullet points." You should add an adjective in there now and again. No.
No.
Maybe I need some purple prose.
Well, I
I
try to
love
make my prose from purple to decadent, so that's what I work on during my edits. Yeah,
a nice array of colors, a rainbow, if you
Yeah.
will.
yeah, nice array of colors. Yeah.
That's great. And I mean, that transition, I'm sure that is complicated, from film to screenplays to prose. It is a very, specific voice, but I know what you mean by the whole like it's very lean, right? Like it's very, I don't know. Um, it's
Yeah.
complicated. And I think it's cool. I think prose is so lovely. I think you can use your own voice, but even so, I hope, Chris, you can still
Mm.
continue to make a film one day. I hope you can make, screenplay, or make it come to life. Like that would
Yeah,
be
one
so cool.
one day. Yeah.
That would be fun. Well, Jen, what about yourself? How did you begin writing? What was your first love in that world?
I have to credit my mom again. I really think she
Please.
implanted, that seed very early that, by telling me stories herself and showing that you could write your own story, you could draw your own pictures for your story. I, I think like most writers, we started little. It was a way to kind of take what we loved about reading, writing, television, movies, whatever, and do it ourselves. Because when you love something, you usually want to also at least give it a try to see if you can do it.
Oh yes. Oh, that's awesome. That's so beautiful. And I love that. I feel like we can almost see that connection with you and your family in the way that you write and the stories that you create. Even if it's not directly about that at times, right? But like you can see that lineage. You can see that it means so much to you. And that gives so much space and freedom for other people that have those cultural connections and just have those deep, deep, right, blood deep relationships.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I definitely didn't realize my mother's influence for a long time. I was just like, as far as I can remember, I've always written, I've always loved art. And then I started to
yeah,
think about it and realized, yeah, I think that was her. She was the first person who introduced me to those things.
yeah, that's all. Shout out, Jen's mama. Well, Jen, speaking of which, too, what has the journey been like exploring cultural identity in writing, yes, and in horror, right? Or whether that's in any of the genres that you've explored, right? But more specifically, like the spooky world. How has that journey been?
I I mean, I was always writing, horror stuff even as a child, probably influenced by, things I saw too early and ended up really relating to and liking.
Yeah.
And I really didn't come to start exploring the folklore, Thai folklore, and my own Thai heritage until later in life.
Hmm.
But I learned, I mean, I always loved Asian horror movies. And I started to see, I think a lot of different Asian cultures share similar spirits and demons. A lot of our monsters have similar themes.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting to dig into Thai folklore and see that thread. And I just, for a lot of it, for what I've seen, a lot of the folklore revolves around monstrous women
Mm.
and, women who really have been wronged, but it's forgotten that they were turned into monsters because they were victimized, and that was their reaction to what was done to them in life.
Right.
And I find that a very exciting thing to explore. I think it's culturally relevant, it's significant in our times, and it's just there's a lot you can do with that. It's why I have a lot of empathy, for the monster type thing, because to me, there's a reason for what they did.
Right. Oh, I love that. I love that you expressed just how much horror reflects society and reflects gender. Absolutely, right? Gender norms and structure, but also the untold things, the things that maybe we aren't allowed to talk about or aren't allowed to
Yeah.
explore. It's so beautiful. And I'm right there with you. I have a huge soft spot, especially for monstrous women. We were talking a little bit
Hmm.
about it before you hopped on,
Mm.
Jen. Um, and I think that's awesome. I think that's so badass that that's how you've bridged those worlds. That's great.
Yeah. It's been fun. It's definitely, I was enjoying writing about women who did terrible things anyway. And then,
Yeah.
starting to discover more in my, in Thai folklore and being like, oh, this is in my DNA.
Yeah.
This is why I do this.
Hmm. It's so cool. It's almost like it's like an ancestral thing at that point, right? There's something that needs to
Yeah.
come out. And this is how I choose to do it. This is my medium.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
great. Well, Chris, what about yourself? How have you explored, right, your own cultural identity and the horror that you write?
Um, well, I guess Silk and Sinew, my entry for this anthology was a bit of an anomaly because I don't think I usually have a sort of cultural sort of themes or drives at the forefront of my mind. But looking at the
Yeah.
stuff I've written so far, it's always got some sort of cross-cultural, bicultural, or
Mm.
some sort of Western and sort of Korean influences involved, and especially in the characters. So I think for me, it kind of came naturally. I just kind of gravitated towards characters and monsters that are have a base of my Korean roots, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think psychoanalyzing myself here, but for you to write something that that's scary or thrilling, it's gotta kind of scare the or thrill the characters themselves, and to do
Mm.
that you really have to know the characters, what they go through, what their identity is. So me being a bicultural or multicultural person, I think yeah because horror is or fear is such a primal sort of thing. I just
Mhm.
naturally ask myself, look, how what would I do in this situation? How would I feel if this happened to me? So yeah, the cultural identity in my writing, I think, um, quite happened uh, very organically, and
Mm.
but for Silk and Sinew, I think I definitely sort of honed in because the story, like half of it's actually true. It's actually happened to me, and the other half, of course, I made it up. But
Oh.
but so this one I've kind of honed in on that the diaspora sort of aspect. Um, so yeah, not too much sort of intentional things going on, I think. But I think that's why for this anthology, I'm really excited to read other people's contributions as well as to see, what their sort of expression of, horror from diverse and cultural identity comes from. So yeah, that's
Ah.
basically it, I guess.
Well, that's wonderful. I feel like very similar to Jen, right? Like that idea of there's something just in you that needs to get out
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of your cultural exploration.
Mm, mm,
And I love how you said too, like not to psychoanalyze, right? But um, that's horror, right? Like that is sometimes it's very hard to sit with your monster. And I think it's really cool that you've given yourself that space to explore it a little further, especially with this anthology, which we will be talking about in
mm,
a little bit
mm,
more. But what a brilliant way to do so, through writing, and through sitting with yourself. That's hard. That's really hard to do, and I commend you for doing it.
mm. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I think, as mentioned, you gotta kind of, scare yourself along the way a little bit for for it to work. So I think in
Yeah,
doing that, my sort of culture thing just came out naturally. So yeah,
yeah, natural. I love these terms that have been thrown around so far: natural, organic, right? Like in your blood, ancestral.
purple,
I
yeah,
think purple, rainbow, all the things.
Decadent,
decadent, yeah,
decadent.
Decadent.
yeah.
I love speaking with authors. Such beautiful vocabulary. Well, Genevieve, how about yourself? What has that exploration for you and your cultural identity been like?
It's actually come in a full circle because we moved to Australia when I was fairly young, so I've lived most of my life in Australia, where I'm the anomaly. Um, it's predominantly white,
Yeah.
a white population, and I growing up there was a lot of racism, so I kind of almost tried to erase my Asianness because you think, well, I don't fit, I don't eat the same things that other people eat. I don't, didn't believe the same things. So, and what I was reading, I didn't see characters or stories that reflected who I was. So I thought, well, that's if I want to succeed as a writer, I need to write white male characters, because I thought that's what made it into the books. And it felt like you're putting on a coat that doesn't quite fit. And it was only when I really started, writing about my own experiences, about my culture and things like that, and exploring that my stories became a lot more resonant, I think, and found homes a lot easier. Just because I was writing things that felt true, and things that were me, and just kind of casting aside that feeling like, oh well, nobody wants to read these stories, nobody's going to buy it, but just like, well, these are the stories I want to tell. These are the stories that, like Chris said, these are the stories that scare me, and these are the things that I'm terrified of, or that I worry about. And so I played them out in a story, and so it's come back like a full circle back to me saying, yes, I am Chinese, I am Malaysian. These are the things that I experience. These are the things I think about. These are the things that scare me.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's how it's happened, and it's just been lucky that whether or not it was the timing or just that groundswell started with Black Cranes, that it's I found a lot more success with my work after I really started sitting into this is who I am. And I'm not fully Chinese Malaysian. If I go back to Malaysia, I don't fit in, but if I'm in Australia, that people will look at me and expect certain things of me that
Yeah.
might not necessarily be who I am. So it's
Yeah.
I'm a I think something you have to claim for yourself is like, this is who I am. I'm part of a diaspora. And this is how I've grown up. That
I
was a
love
long
that.
answer. Sorry.
A beautiful answer. I promise you all, you will not have too long of answers. Like, please tell us everything. And I'm first of all, I'm so sorry that you've had to experience such harsh, I don't know, beginnings in terms of your writing and where you thought you had to be and where you had to exist. And I think it's so brilliant that you've chosen to write from this middle ground, from this gray area, from this liminal space, right? Where so many of us find ourselves and feel more comfortable and more safe. And I think it's beautiful because now little Genevieve, right, is getting that nice tightly fitted jacket stitched for her, right? Like through the words that you're creating and the stories that you're crafting. And so many other children, so many other adults, so many other human beings in general need that so desperately. um, is that voice is that voice from something so unique yet so personal to them. And I think it's lovely. I'm so happy that you've found that safe space in that writing.
Thank you. I think horror is a good place to be for that. I think, there are so many people in horror that feel like outcast, or that feel that they don't fit, and they're the strange ones that see the darkness and see the weirdness and are drawn to it, and other people are like, oh, what's wrong with you? But yeah, horror, it's just a really nice place to be. It sounds weird.
It's
That sounds
home.
strange to say that.
No, you're preach to the choir. I'm pretty sure everybody
Mhm.
feels exactly how you do right now.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, speaking of a beautiful home for horror, and anybody can answer this, would you all telling us a little bit about this incredible anthology that you all are a part of, Silk and Sinew? Anybody can go.
I can kind of give a little insight into how it all started.
Go for it. Yes,
Um,
please.
Lee, Murray, and I were in a pitching session with an agent, and we are just chatting away. And Lee just looked at her phone, and she just showed the agent. And Kristy was watching a panel on folklore, I believe, and she was just struck that there were voices that were missing from the conversation. And she's like, well, this is something that we need to do. And Lee was like, yes. And she showed it to the agent, and the agent said she loved it. And as sometimes happens in publishing, it didn't end up being published through that avenue, and it ended up with Bad Hand Books by a different pathway. But that's kind of how it all started. Kristy just had this feeling like that these were these other stories, these folklore stories that needed to be told, and she came up with this brilliant theme for the anthology. So I hope I'm allowed to say that. I hope I'm allowed to say how it started. Oh,
I'm
Kristy, like,
sure.
shh, Genevieve, shh.
If not Kristy will tell us. Kristy will say, please don't. But that's so amazing. Shout out to Kristy. And I love that you were there in those beginnings, Genevieve. And that's so beautiful that Kristy was like, no, there's something missing. A whole lot, actually, that's missing. So many other diverse, different perspectives, yet all unique to this specific exploration of horror, and identity and cultural identity. And I think that's so lovely. That's beautiful. And as far as we know, right, release date, we don't know the specific date, but May of 2025. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I know, we're going to be kind of touching on a couple of different things in each of your all stories. But I promise no spoilers, nothing like that. I'm sure all of us, just like myself and our audience, are very excited to read them for ourselves. But I'm excited. That's going to be such a great collection. And I'm so happy that you're all a part of it. All right. This is potentially maybe the toughest question that I'm going to ask each of you. And Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you the question first. In your words, what do you think is a monster?
Oof. Many different ways you could approach it, I think, and especially in the realm of folklore. But for me, and the sort of theme um, and the type of story I was going with, I would define my monster as something that's part of the character or the reader or yourself. That's always there, but um, sometimes it comes back to haunt you or attack you. But I would define monster as something that's not too other or un um, undefinable, but that's something that's always within yourself. That in folklore you kind of project as this scary, monstrous thing. But and that's why I think in my story, and I've played a lot with the theme of guilt, because guilt as a form of a monster in folklore, I think is really uh, terrifying, at least for me. So that's how it that's along the lines of how I define it. It's not very clear cut, but yeah.
Oh, it's wonderfully cut. I think that makes a lot of sense. I love how you use the word of this idea of projection, but this idea of familiarity, right? A
Yes.
monster is something we
Mm.
perhaps, for better or for worse, know very well.
And
Um,
perhaps that's why it's so fearful sometimes, because it's a part of you that that exists, but now it's projected as this creature that you want to avoid and is trying to kill you or whatever. So that's the sort of line I would take to define the monster in my story.
And I love how you said too, right? Like this, not to, in a way with your definition, it's not otherizing the monster, you're otherizing yourself. in that way, and that's
Yeah. Mm,
interesting. That is
mm,
very, very cool.
mm. Perhaps it's a part of you that you don't really want to face, or you're scared to face, and it's a projection of that in a folklore background. Yeah.
Mm, haunting. Well, Jen, what about yourself? What do you think is the definition of a monster?
Well, first of all, I love Chris's definition. I really
Thank you.
relate. I thought that was great. I really relate to that. I think you're so right about othering and that the real monster is a toxic emotion that harms you, that you
Mm,
have to live with. That
mm,
that is absolutely great. I think that's exactly it. I mean, I was thinking about this question more literally for myself, and to me, monster is, it can be two things. It's a label, it's a negative label that we might place on a, like with spirits, a misunderstood woman who acts out, who was victimized and she acts negatively. She's a monster.
mm,
And the other definition of a monster, you could go, it's literally a being of evil. It acts entirely out of evil. Everything it does is evil. And that's a
Mhm.
lot rarer. Humans, other creatures, spirits are a lot more complicated than that. So I think there's two definitions because of that. And, there's always a backstory. There's always a reason someone behaves the way they do.
Yeah, I love that. I love it so much. I think that the fact that you like express it in two different definitions almost makes it two times scarier, right? Because it could be so many different things. And that's what's so terrifying. And I think, again, speaking on that idea of reflection of yourself, and as you mentioned, Jen, right, the emotion and that thing that we're afraid of so deeply, it can take such a hold of you, and it's so terrifying, but at the same time, right, like how you mentioned, there's a lot of privilege too, and who gets to call who a monster, as you said, like with
Yeah,
monstrous
exactly.
women,
mm.
right? Who gets to say that, and who gets to define that, and what do you mean by monster? So I love that. I love that there's empathy in your definition, Jen. I think that's
Yeah.
great.
I think I just relate. And, again, what you were just saying, I think it reflects back to what Chris said. When we call something a monster, that's a reflection of the person using that word. It's not really a reflection of who's being called a monster. You've
Yeah.
othered somebody using that term now because you don't understand them. And that is much more common than a true literal monster who works entirely out of evil for no reason other than evil.
So much fear comes from what people don't understand or don't choose to want to understand. And I think that's
Yeah.
what encapsulates your definition so well.
Yeah, and I really like those two different definitions that Jen gave, and like we were talking about before, these the female ghosts in Asian folklore. Just
Yeah.
in my opinion, I think they are so scary because at the one end you have the negative label, the misunderstanding, this sort of um, um, this negative projection or an image that's forced on them, and
Yeah.
the other side you have this force of sheer evil, and the female ghost kind of falls in the middle. That's why they kind of cover both
Mhm.
sides, like just like simple examples like Juon, Ringu, things like that. Where do they really
Mm.
fall in that scale? And I think that's why yeah, female ghosts in Asian folklore are so prominent and so
Mhm.
scary, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
They were forced to be there, right? Like they were forced to be, just as we were talking about, right? Like Genevieve
Mm,
with this idea of liminal space, this idea of not really
mm,
fully having a place.
mm,
And I think that's what's so beautiful about monstrous women, is you were like, I don't know why y'all are so scared, right? You put us here, right? Like we are, you're not going to fully understand what the hell we are, and that's our
Yep.
superpower. And I think that's badass. Like that is such a cool, ugh, I love it. We could, just so you know, you all can come back and we'll have a full other episode on just monstrous women in general, so keep that in mind.
I mean, I mean,
Yes, yes. Well, Genevieve, how about yourself? What is your definition of a monster?
it probably follows pretty closely to what you're saying, badass. My favorite thing to write is a female character who is underestimated and is invisible at the start of the story. And as the
Mm,
story unfolds, her she becomes, or she reveals her monstrous, powerful self, and then she just lays waste to everything. I love that playing out. That is the most fun thing to write. I think Rhonda Jackson Garcia said in a StokerCon panel that the reason that people fear monsters women is because the monster is the most powerful thing in the room. And I love that. That is something that is stuck in my head forever and ever since I heard that. So yeah, it's something that's a monster for me is not necessarily evil or wicked, but something that has the capacity to inspire awe and terror. And like Jen said, is misunderstood, often misunderstood. But I think a lot of stories now, because we're seeing a lot more diversity in writing, there is that reclamation of monstrosity. It's like you're going to call me a monster. I will show you monstrousness, and this is what it looks like. So that's what I think a monster is for me. It is something that is powerful and has a story, and maybe it's playing out its story. And a lot of Chinese ghost stories, the reason why they're scary is that there is no directed malice. I think they're just playing out their story. You just happen to be caught up in it, so there isn't much that you can do. You have to try to find a way to survive them, and that's it. But they will play out their story, and sometimes you escape, sometimes you don't.
Oh, that's fantastic. First of all, Rhonda, what a great, a great like quote. What a great
I
idea
know.
of
I
being so
know.
powerful in the room, and that idea too of instilling awe and wonder and fear, and you don't know why you're terrified, but you are, is so beautiful. And I think, you make such a wonderful point about those specific monsters and spirits, right? That this is going to play out no matter what. If you happen to get caught up in this narrative, in this story, well, too bad, right? Like this is what it is. And one of my favorite things in the world to explore is how generational trauma is folklore too, and it's unintentionally passed down to us, right? Like whether we know it or not, right? We are going to get it. And I think in monsters, right, that's where you can really see it personified, right? That's where you can really see it be and exist. And I think that is what your definition says, Genevieve. I love that. That's beautiful. Well, let's get into these monsters. I think I'm so excited. Genevieve, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
And and you have two, which is even better. And I'm so excited. So please, we can go one at a time. And forgive me if I mispronounce anything too. Please feel free to correct me at any point. But let's go ahead and start first with the polong. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's if you want to say it like with a Malaysian accent, it's a bolong.
Polong.
Bolong, yeah. So
Beautiful.
and that is a lot of Malaysian ghosties and spirits have quite a gruesome origin. I think that this is like a tiny woman that's created. She's kept in like she's created from a bottle of a murdered victim's blood. So a shaman, a bomo,
Oh,
creates her, and there is a certain magic to creating her. And she has it's kind of tied together. She has a little kind of like a familiar, a pelicit, which is like a little grasshopper with a sharp nose, like a needle nose.
yeah.
And they're summoned sometimes just for causing mischief, or for being a pain to other like people that you want to target. But sometimes they can be well, I turned it into something a lot more monstrous. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's usually just summoned for either for profit or for causing nuisance to somebody else. And the weird, really weird part, there's some random things that happen with some Malaysian myths, is that if you're infected with one of these things, because the pellicet will crawl backwards into the intended victim's gullet and then sing to the polong, and the polong will find the victim and almost possess them. And then bruises will appear on their body, and then they'll start ranting about cats. I don't know why it has to be cats, but yeah, that's the thing that they start. So I guess when somebody goes on about their fur babies and cats and things, like you're possessed. Yeah. So
No.
it's
Oh
so
my
yeah.
gosh.
But then they can go insane and then eventually die from this possession. And the way that you exercise it is to get the polong itself to say the name of its creator, and then it leaves the victim. But again, there's a lot of steps and magic involved in trying to get the victim to say who's who's haunting them. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What a dynamic duo. That is a horrifying, right? Dynamic duo, but dynamic nonetheless. My goodness. That is so freaky in the best way. And there's possession involved,
Yeah.
right? And ooh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Um, and for people like this is our first time, that may be our first time exploring these monsters. Can you tell us, Genevieve, what do they look like, right? Like in your eyes, in your mind, what does a belong look like, and what does a pelicit look like?
The images I've seen of a polong is, again, we spoke about monstrous women, and usually they've got the hair, long hair covering their face, and she's just a tiny, probably about the size of somebody's first digit, in a little bottle, and she's naked. In my story, I wanted her to be like a crone, because she's been part of the story for a while, for a couple of generations. So, and she is quite gruesome. The pelicit is like it. I've seen pictures that where Malaysian people say, I've seen one, this is what it looks like. And it's just like a little green grasshopper with a pointy nose. And that's the part that either burrows into somebody's abdomen, the needle, or else it's got spiky legs and it crawls back in backwards.
Oh my
I don't know why it
gosh.
has to be backwards. I don't know.
That is
I don't know why it's
very
got cats.
interesting. I mean, if you
Yeah.
really think about it, like grasshoppers' legs look like they're going backwards anyway. I've always found that interesting. And I'm
Yeah.
curious too, Genevieve, do you know if there's any specific folkloric mythology or any type of cultural relation in the world of grasshoppers and Malaysian culture? Is there any connection at all? Or are they
Um,
specifically something?
it's I think it originated again from animism, where they assign a soul or a spirit to animals, to things and objects and things like that. So that, I think, is what the pelicit came from. But it's also, as happens with a lot of Chinese mythology and culture, it's the sound of something, and so the sound of a word, and so that they will tie it to. So that Belicit sounded like a buzzer, so it's that calling to the polong.
Mm.
Yeah. So so I've tried to find out where it comes from, and how it came to be, but
Yeah.
it's just, again, that almost that acceptance that this thing arose, this thing is, and there's just descriptions of it and what it's used for, how, and there's varying degrees, there's varying descriptions of how to create one, how to control it, how to, because you're supposed to feed the polong with blood from your ring finger.
That's right. Fingers.
Yeah,
Yes.
ring finger. So how did that come to be? How did that? Did somebody find a tiny naked woman and start feeding the blood from their finger? I don't know. Yeah, so I haven't been able to find sources to say how it originated, just that it is something that is used. And it depends who you are. It can be quite a status symbol to have one because it can bring you profit. Yeah.
I love
It's a lot of
that.
strangeness.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In a frightening way. And I think, like you said, right, it really highlights status in such a terrifying way. And that idea of control is so fascinating to me, right? And I think there is that innate human fear of losing control, yes, but not being able to have control of one's own body or mind or thoughts or, what have you. And that's so freaky. And I think they use that power so well in what you've described. That's something else. How terrifying.
I love this. I love how there's so much like elements to this. You create it with the
Yeah.
murder victim's blood, and then there's two
Hmm.
counterparts, crawls in the body, sings, and then start calling out for cats. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yes. So
Yeah,
many unique.
the actually the most gruesome part I haven't even spoken about, the way
All
that
right.
you create a palisade. One of the ways is that you go under the light of the full moon, you go to an ant mound, and it's supposed to be like, if it's I think it's the crossroads where a child has been buried, and you sing or you call to it, and after a while this child um, comes out, and then you have to say something to it. The child will stick its tongue out, and you take the tongue, and the tongue becomes the palisade. So I don't know how that
Oh,
came to be. So
Oh, I
yeah,
love it.
there again, like you say, Christopher, there's so many parts to the mythology, and the more that I researched it, the more came out, and just thinking, is it one type of creature, or is it that are there many, or there are different types? It's like with like
right.
Jen was saying, there's a lot of similarities between like Thai, Malaysian, Chinese mythology, where we have a lot of similar
Right.
creatures. Like we've
Hmm.
got the Tianak, or the Quikia, or the Toyo, which is the vampiric baby, but
Yeah.
it's something that occurs across a couple of different cultures. Yeah,
Definitely.
but then there's variations for each one, but there are similarities. But I don't know if there's anything that's similar to the Polong and the Pelisit. I don't know.
Gosh. So unique and so cool. I really do love that there are so many circumstances that have to happen for them to exist and for them to live and feed. And I find that so brilliant. Just such a fruitful story. Do you remember when you first heard of these two creatures, Genevieve, or when they were first introduced to you?
This was going down one of those rabbit holes. I was researching for some other story, but I don't remember actually hearing about the Polong and the Pelisit as a kid. But we were talking before about Malaysian animism, and I remember um, hearing just that experience of understanding that the that things have spirits, trees have
Mm,
spirits, the ground, the earth has spirits, and so even though it is bizarre, it also still feels like I've heard this story before. I've heard something like this. So
mm.
that's probably my memory of encountering something like this. That of course there would be a grasshopper that could be
Right.
controlled to possess somebody. Of course there'd be,
Naturally.
yeah, yeah. And of course that's how you make it.
Right. Yeah. Just
Yeah,
just get a finger. No big deal. Blood. No big deal.
yeah.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
it kind of scares me how detailed the process is. Makes it seem like someone's actually
Mhm.
tried it,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
at least a
Maybe
couple
my
times.
maybe my
Mhm.
grandmother.
So
Maybe she was in the process.
with a talisman. Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
exactly. I love it. Well, of course, we're going to be exploring each of them a little bit more as well. But Jen, and again, correct me if I mispronounce anything, but please tell us what a Maynok is.
Maynak, I'm terrible at pronunciations for sure. I unfortunately know very little Thai, so
That is
but
all
it's
right.
basically it translates. So she was a woman named Nak, and her name May is mom or mama. It also I've seen people translate it specifically to her. She could be Lady Nak as well, or Mama Nak. And she was based on, some people believe she was based on a real woman a few hundred years ago, who basically she's always described as a very, very beautiful young woman with long black hair. There was a shrine to her in Thailand where there's people bring artwork. There's all kinds of beautiful artwork of her. People bring offerings. She's believed to help women have an easy childbirth, pregnancy and childbirth. But she was a human woman who very much was in love with her husband, Mac. They had this great life together. She was pregnant and he was sent away to war. And while he was fighting in the war, she died in childbirth. And he comes home from the war and she is there in the house with their new baby. And he's happy. He doesn't know she's a ghost. He doesn't know the baby's a ghost. Life is good. And then the neighbors start telling him, no, she died in childbirth. You're living with ghosts. And he doesn't believe it. And, he doesn't believe it until one day he sees her reach for a lime that she dropped and her arm is supernaturally long. And at that point, he's like, okay, she's a ghost. And he runs screaming from her, basically. So she, again, is the prime example of a wronged woman. She was a victim. It's not her fault that things turned out like this. She just wanted to live with her husband and her baby. And she then goes and terrorizes the village because she's angry that they told her husband this. And then he ran away and it's ruined. And, her bad deeds come out of grief. And there's a few different ends to the story. One of the tellings is a monk is able to capture her in a jar and he throws her in the river.
Oh my gosh.
One of the ones I love is a monk captures her and he puts her in his waistband. And that waistband is still in the possession of the Thai royal family, which I find interesting. I'd love to know if there is this framed waistband or, encased waistband of some sort that might have her spirit in it in the castle, in the palace. And the more humane, happier ending is a monk captures her, but he tells her, okay, if you go into the afterlife, you stop terrorizing people, you will get to come back in the next life and you'll get your husband and your baby in the next life. So that's definitely the more positive ending for her. But it's a very popular Thai folklore. It's probably the first one I ever read about and just loved it. I had a book of all kinds of folklore and different things as a kid. I think, it's definitely a very sad one. And, it was a theme I ended up seeing in a lot of Thai spirits when I was writing about it, is that there's a lot of Thai spirits that deal with being hungry as well, not only wronged women, but being hungry and unsatisfied. And that's why they roam and do damage as spirits. Like the Pret is one. It's basically people who in life were greedy. So they're doomed to roam in their next life as these people who have pinhole mouths. So it's very difficult to eat and they can never get full. And then there's Krausu, which is a woman who was basically a head and entrails hanging out of her head. That's another popular one. And she just roams around at night eating. It's so much, it's hunger and basically being wronged seem to be two things that, make these spirits, at least in Thai folklore, monstrous.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it so much. And I love this exploration of never fully satiated, of never full.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's so strongly with the Maynok and emotionality and grief and processing. And you mentioned something so powerful too, Jen, the family she could never have.
Yeah.
is so, oh my gosh, just what a gut punch, and I love, that you express too that she in this story is a victim, right? She is the one that didn't do anything wrong, but is seen as the monster, is seen as this negative, terrible thing, right? and
Yeah.
and that is so, oh, what a powerful narrative. Oh my
But I do
goodness.
think it's pretty helpful to me as I was doing more research about this that there is a shrine dedicated to her, where women go with offerings for a healthy and successful childbirth. So that tells me that, the story is turning a little bit towards
Yeah,
sympathy for her and the understanding that she wasn't really a monster.
that reclamation of power, as we talked
Hmm.
about too, right?
Hmm.
As a guardian, as a spirit, as a guide. And I think that's so cool. That's so brilliant for her. And I think it's beautiful she gets to have these families as well in that way.
Yeah.
Well, I know you mentioned too, Jen, the idea, right? She has this long black hair and things. Are
Hmm.
there any other physical descriptors to what she may look like or how she may appear?
I just know that consistently across all stories that she's very beautiful. She was
Mm,
a beautiful human woman who became a ghost who I would assume was, looked corporeal because her husband, Mac, had no idea. He thought his wife
yeah.
was alive. So there was nothing about her that was ghost like.
And that says so much too about the unspoken emotionality and the things we keep down, and just the idea that this entire death, this entire sadness and grief and passing was just missed, right? Like this idea of, oh, that man never fully realized she was gone. Um,
It's like, yeah,
oh,
is it what he wanted to see? Or
mm-hmm.
was it, she really did present that human like to him?
Yes.
But yeah, I think it probably was what he wanted to see as well.
Ooh, beautiful. And when do you remember when you were first introduced to her, Jen?
I had a book when I was a little kid, a little illustrated book, to try to teach me Thai, and it had
Oh,
folklore stories, in there as well. And I think that was probably it. She's probably the most famous, in
yeah.
spirits in Thai folklore. So I've definitely seen stories of her a lot in my life.
Oh, I love it, and I love that she's stuck with you
Yeah.
for so long. I feel like I'm sure you can all relate too, right? Like these entities, these monsters, stay with you for a reason, or they present back to you right later in life when they need you most, when you need them most. And I think it's really wonderful that you're exploring her again. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, we're going to go on down the line. Chris, and again, with the pronunciation, feel free to correct
Hmm.
me. But Chris, what is the Gawi Nulam?
Kawinulem. So that's there's two aspects to it. One of the first one is quite physiological. It just means sleep paralysis. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced it or quite get
It's
it quite often.
horrible.
Okay, it is horrible. And
Horrible. Yeah.
the first one is sleep paralysis, and the kawin as what you experience or see through it is the phenomena, the ghosts or the monsters that you experience in that event. So there's two kind of aspects to that. Um, so I mean, sleep paralysis is basically your body sort of going out of sync when you go to sleep. So your brain's kind of aware, but your body's you can't move your body, and that experience can be very suffocating. And then you're half asleep, so you're kind of dreaming, but not really. So you see things in your room often, things that are on top of you, trying to strangle you. Um,
Mm.
and all sort of unpleasant experiences. And I think going back to the origins of how this sort of relates to um, uh, folklore, I think is that back in the days people didn't really have an explanation as to why these things were happening, and obviously they saw a lot of ghosts when these things happened. So and there's a lot of just people dying in the middle of the night for undiagnosed diseases or whatever. And I think that's why a lot of it really stuck. This Kauinulim, this it kind of means being pressed by scissors, really. If you translate it directly, so I think that's how it all kind of fed into the Korean folklore or horror urban legend, I guess. Into that sphere. And I think the most famous one that kind of relates to this. It includes a young woman who is beautiful with long black hair. I think that's a running theme in
Love
a
it.
lot of Asian horror. So she was sexually assaulted and murdered by a high-ranking government official, and the body was hidden away, and she was of a low social status, and everyone kind of went shh, no one really talked about it. So every night the official would go to sleep. He would see from outside the window that girl just approaching, but standing still from the lake that they drowned the body in, and he can't move. And every night that body would just come closer and closer and closer and closer. And when it reaches him, he dies in his sleep. So that's kind of like I mean, there's variations to this, but that's the sort of the whole basis of how this monster came to be. Um, and me being me, I never had it before I was 25, but I really wanted to try it out. So I actually
Chris.
learned how to get it. Um, you got to be really tired, but sometimes the best way to do it is to oversleep. So when you wake up, when you sleep for too long, you feel really groggy, and you know you feel even more tired. You force yourself back to sleep, and then you kind of get it, and then you hear this very sort of crashing noise in your ears. And the first one I saw is the what I call the long neck lady, with a bloody face that kind of flashes before your eyes. That was really interesting. Um,
Charming. Oh, Chris.
Once you do it enough, it's not the ghosts that scare you. There was one time when my father was kind of sitting at the foot of my bed, and then we were just conversing, we're talking about things, right? And I don't remember what we talked about, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I haven't lived with you for like 8 years. What are you doing in my room? And then I realized I was, you know, dreaming, and then I got the paralysis. And my dad just kind of, kind of like Leatherface, like his skin just turned to leather, and there was nothing underneath it, and he kind of just sank like a balloon, and then he drifted towards me, and kind of stayed there for a while. And so I woke up. My dad's fine, by the way. He's very
Oh,
good. But
good.
I think subconsciously, because our family was going through a tough time at that moment, and then my father had mental health issues. Now he's great.
Oh,
So I
good.
think when it really plays off your subconscious, because maybe deep inside me I kind of resented my dad or something like that, and I wasn't happy with how things were going. So it really shines a light into what you're really going through at that moment, and the things that truly scare you. And for me, I'm really used to seeing all sorts of demons and ghosts during my sleep paralysis experiments. But like when your family turns up, it's a different story. It's very unsettling, and then you wake up and you maybe it's a sign. You call them, hey, how you doing? Like I haven't called in a while, so maybe it's a good thing. So yeah, I think it's a very uh, powerful and at times terrifying phenomenon that spawned a lot of spooky folk horror legends. So that's that's the basis of the Kauinulim.
Holy crap, Chris. That's wild. My goodness. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, talk about diving into your craft. You're very brave um
it's
for
very
that.
because you want to experience it at least once, right? But the problem is once you get it once, you keep getting it, so you can't kind of unget it. But
It's
I think
there forever.
it's so interesting that the things that, like you're talking about the origin of your monster, um, the character would have been frightened of the woman appearing closer and closer, and the thing that unnerved you was not monsters and things, but seeing your dad. So it's like
Yeah.
it's almost things that are personal,
Mm.
that
Yes.
have like a personal meaning, are the things that will
Exactly.
really
Yes.
frighten you. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And I can't spoil it, but there's a section of my story that actually happened that scared the crap out of me because I thought something really bad happened to my family. So
Wow.
when you hit with that, it's not just spooky ghosts anymore. It's something that's really personal, and especially if you're going through a tough patch with your family or your loved ones, and they turn up and they're all messed up.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
eh, it's scary. So for me, that's like the core of the horror of this monster, so to say, like Genevieve said.
Goodness, that's so interesting. There's a book that I read. I can't think of the name, but they were exploring kind of like the oral transmission and tradition folklorically
Mm-hmm.
of sleep paralysis. I think it was in Ireland. They were exploring the old hag, right? That's a very specific um, uh, entity that people see,
Right,
right?
right.
Like that's just one of the many.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've never actually heard of seeing people like
Mm,
seeing individual family members, people
yeah.
so I can't
Mm,
imagine.
mm,
And you've thrown around these words that I really want to touch deeper on, and I honestly want to touch deeper on with all of you, right? I think you mentioned this sense of familial guilt, Chris, and maybe even unbeknownst trauma that you didn't realize that you
yeah.
had until it appeared to you,
Yes, I
you know?
think especially that incident, or not an incident, but that
Yeah.
dream with my father in it. I never thought I really had any kind of resentment or bad feelings because of the
Yeah.
condition he was going through at the time. And then, and obviously you can't just be like, some emotions and um, uh, some uncomfortable feelings. People do have to keep it repressed, especially when it comes to
Yeah.
loved ones. You can't repress it too much, but when someone's not well or ill, you gotta kind of, and it's a very it's a very Asian
Yes.
patriarchal thing. But oh, you're the firstborn son, and you just
Mhm.
kind of just gotta soldier through it, I guess. But
Mm.
those experiences kind of, I think, really show you what you've been kind of keeping bottled up inside. And it's so weird that my dad turned like deflated like a balloon and started floating around the room. I don't know what that
Yeah.
represents, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, those images, unsettling as they can be, is a kind of like a sneak peek into the what the stuff you're going through in your psyche or your subconscious. So and I think it runs especially deep when it's family, I think. So that's
Mm.
the sort of because the more you love people and care about them, the more you know stuff, emotional burden, I guess, that you hold with you. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, like you said, that's a big part of the story and a big part of my personal experience with this monster as well.
And it's so wild how right, like the big phenomenon obviously with sleep paralysis is you can't
Mm.
move, right? Like that's it, right? You are
Yeah,
paralyzed.
yeah,
And I find it so fascinating, Chris, that your subconscious was like, you have to listen to this. Or sorry, you can't get out of this. There is something you need to know
yeah.
in this even if you can't remember the conversation
Mm,
or really right like the logistics of it all, it's like you need to sit with your father, um and that's
yeah, yeah,
so emotional. Oh
yeah.
my goodness.
Maybe it was, you gotta. This is something. This is a part of your emotion that you sort of have to face. Sometime. Maybe it was
Mm.
my subconscious brain trying to tell me that, or however it
Yeah.
interpreted it. But yeah, being unable to move. That's that's a big
Mm.
part of um, uh, the horror of the experience. you gotta wriggle your fingers and your toes to kind of get out of it. Gotta start slow, and then suddenly you go, oh, and you're up. But
Oh,
yeah, just in
God.
case you guys get it in the near future.
Thanks.
I was prepping myself all day because I know now, Chris, I'm probably going to have it just because we were talking about it. And I'm like,
Oh, no.
great. I'm going to be like, don't think about it. And then I'm going to think about it.
And you're gonna have the
Oh,
bolong and the bellicid crawling around
I
you, and
know. Goodness, the Maynock, everybody's coming into Camille's room, I guess, today. But speaking of all of them, though, coming into our lives and, expanding on what we just talked about, Chris, and we'll start with you, Chris. Whether that is guilt, right, or this a sense of emotionality or things being revealed or secrets, right? What has your monster taught you in the world of parallelism, right? This way, like maybe you connect in a way perhaps you don't want to, in a way perhaps you do want to, right? Like, what are the connections you found with your monster, and how has it shaped you?
um, yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, I guess part of that was kind of answered through my, that
Mm.
experience with my father and the subconscious thing or whatever. But
Yeah.
an interesting thing I experienced personally, because the whole thing for me started as a fun thing, right? Oh, I want to
Yeah.
experience it. I wonder what it's like,
Yeah.
and then it
Yeah.
became like a sort of like this, this daredevil, let's try it once kind of thing, into this recurring nightmares that I got, which kind of it gets entertaining after a while, when your family's not involved, because, I wonder what's going to turn up, like the Irish
Oh.
witch hag
Uh-huh.
or whatever, like, I would like to see what she looks like. So it becomes this sort of fun thing, and also like a source for your an inspiration for, your horror writing as well, I think, because you see a lot of different um, spooky looking creatures
Yeah.
during that thing, and then from that to, kind of uh, as an experience to look within myself, or what am I really going through underneath it all. So I think that was the kind of my journey personally with this monster or phenomenon, and then by writing the story for Silk and Sinew, I think it's kind of come full circle. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's I'm quite happy for its presence in my life,
Mm.
I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I've loved that you've been able to see that full 360, right, of emotions for yourself, in
Mm,
writing it and experiencing it.
mm, mm.
Well, Jen, how about yourself? Have you explored any parallels, or if so, what parallels have arisen between you and exploring this monster?
Well, for me, I I wrote my story, Guilt is a Little House, from the main character. The point of view is from the baby, from Mac and Mac's
Oh.
baby, and she's a teenage girl now. And her and her mother live in a spirit house on the landlord's property. And a spirit house is something in Thailand and also parts of Southeast Asia where if you build a house on land, you have displaced the spirits who lived there before you. So a spirit house is a
Mm,
miniature house, like a dollhouse sized house that you put out front,
Yeah.
that, for those displaced spirits to live. So my character Val and her mother live in the spirit house on this property. And she knows she's dead. She knows her mother's dead. Her mother sleeps all day. But she also has to watch the landlord's daughter, who's her age, grow up and have the life that she's never going to have.
Mm.
And, it's kind of this push and pull. She's forever tied to this land with her mother, and she's tied to her mother. And to me, that speaks of, filial duty to your parent,
mm,
which is something that's very common in a lot of Asian cultures, in that, it's kind of the opposite of the Western mindset of you've raised a child, they grow up, you've raised them to be on their own, bye, and that's
Yeah.
that.
mm,
Yeah.
And in a lot of, cultures, actually, not a lot of non-Western cultures, it's not like that. Generations live together, live nearby, they take care of each other. You
mm,
come back and take care of your parents. when they need it, when they're old. And that was definitely, you know, with things I'm going through in my life now, parallel to my story, in that Val, the main character, is tied to her mother. She has that duty, you know, to care for her, and she can't do the things that, you know, the landlord's daughter is westernized that she can go do, you know, go off to college, things like that, travel. So I think, you know, that, and it's that push pull between duty and independence. And, you know, with Knack, she very much, it wasn't duty that kept her tied as its spirit to the land. It was love. It was pure love for her family, you know. And I think, you know, for me, I'm biracial, so I have that push pull of, you know, Eastern and Western constantly, of what I'm supposed to do and what I should do, and trying to find a balance in that.
Beautifully said, Jen. And I'm sure it's been hard and complex, but I love that you're exploring that so much, and those deep connections and those relationships that we're born into, that we create, that we craft. And I love that the Maynok has helped weave that connection, or further weave that connection between you and your mother. That's fascinating.
I think I've just always loved that story, and I obviously have a lot of sympathy for her, and I just felt like I've written about her several times. And I also, I love spirit houses. I've woven spirit houses into a lot of my stories too. I love that whole, you know, again, it's the opposites of, in Western culture. We want to banish ghosts, you know, their ghosts and spirits are a nuisance. They're a menace. We want them gone. You know, a Western horror movie's all about how do we get rid of them. And then I remember growing up, we went to Thailand when I was a teenager to visit my family. And the most popular thing on TV was a soap opera where one of the main characters was a ghost. And he remained in a relationship to his girlfriend, and that was absolutely normal. You know, they found a way to live with ghosts, spirit houses, et cetera, et cetera. It's just what you do. You know, they're not always evil. They're not always a nuisance, and they're definitely not meant to be banished. Whether they're evil or not, there is a way to coexist with them.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
It's so interesting that the perspective is from the daughter, right? Because I was fully expecting it to be from the lady Knock, you know, wreaking havoc and, you know, whatever. But yeah, that's such an interesting take. Yeah.
I definitely wanted to parallel, you know, what it would be like if you had to grow up in that situation, and then seeing, you know, the landlord's daughter have the entire life you should have had, and how frustrating your duty to your mother is, you know, which is of no fault of your own, especially your duty in that kind of situation where you're trapped in a spirit house.
I'm so excited to read it. All of your stories. This is great. This is fantastic. Well, Genevieve, how about yourself? Have you found or explored parallels or parallelism, either in the story you're writing, right, in the monsters themselves? What have you explored?
For me, even though the story is about colonialism and it is about exploitation and sand mining and sand piracy, the heart of the story is someone's asking, "Who am I?" And the monsters are, I mean, they're the creating and keeping of Apollon and Pelesit. It requires sacrifice and secrets. And that, my mom has told me a lot of stories about our family, what was done so that the family flourished. Nothing like what I put into my story. So please don't think that we're like the bad people in the story. But just that question of, who am I and where did I come from? And so that was, I think, what I used the creatures kind of for, as a way to bring out these stories. And even if the answer is something monstrous, this character is still driven to find out. It's still driven to tell the story. And that is, in a way, kind of what ghost stories and monster stories can be about. It's like one of the ways of banishing a ghost is to figure out what happened to it. That's the more Western take, but then the maybe the more Asian take is not to banish them, but just to understand this is their story. This is how we coexist, like Jan was saying. This is how we coexist, and so it was I think the point of the story was to tell a story and to figure out my own story. So I think that's probably what this, that my story, if I'm to earn my tether, and that's it. If I'm to earn who I am and all of the history that's come before me, I need to know what it is. So.
Oh, so well said. I love it. I love it. Just like how we mentioned, right? How these beings call out to you. There's still unfinished business. There's something you need to know about yourself, about your culture, about your family, right? And I think it's so lovely that they are that communicative tool, right? They are that thing that helps us so deeply. And I love that they've been with you, Genevieve. I love that you're with them. I love that there is that give and take. I love that there is so much exploration.
Yeah, and the part of the mythology of the polong is the way to take control of it is to call its name, is to name it. So that was probably, I think, the biggest parallel is when we're as storytellers, we put things into words, and we give things names. We hold things up for examination.
I love how unironically all three of the monsters that you all chose, in some point in the lore, right, you have to identify if it is real or not. Or, right, like the existence. Is what, are you alive? Are you dead? Did this happen? Did this not happen? Right? You have to call to see, like, there's so much interesting truth in that identity and recognizing it. And I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, and with the Palong and the Palisade, and the stating of the name, I see like a
Yes.
probably unrelated, but like a very a bit of a parallel to the whole very Catholic demonism, the exorcism aspect to it, where you have to
Yeah.
spell out the demon's name to to get rid of it. So that's the power of stating one's name. That's kind of like a interesting Western and Eastern parallel there. It's cool.
Yes.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
but
Well
the
said, Chris.
interesting difference is with the polong in the palisade, stating its name can exercise it, but it's also gives you control over it, and you can
Right.
take possession of it. Whereas
Uh,
I suppose with the Catholic version, it is trying to control it, but the goal is to banish it.
mm, mm.
Yeah. I'm trying not to give spoilers to my story.
I know. Totally.
Almost.
I think I already spoiled mine,
Oh, so it's
but
okay.
I
No.
I really love like what Genevieve's saying too about the name and how it has dual purposes. Like my first thought when you said that was, okay, acknowledgement. That's the first thing. We have acknowledged this monster, this
Mm,
spirit. And then the second thing is power and control now that we know the name. So that's super interesting. And I kind of wonder with, what Chris brought up about Catholicism and exorcisms. To me, I see a divide. The name is power entirely in Catholicism and control. And I think
mm,
it's missing the Eastern, the acknowledgement, the I see you. I know your name. I've learned about you.
right.
I've learned why you do this. So that's super
Oh,
interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely I saw a movie recently that kind of explored this topic, but the sort of your very uh standard divide of good and evil that is quite common in sort of the Western, sort of the Christian Catholic sphere. It's not really the same when it comes to the East. There's always this sort of almost like a circular sort of it's always in the gray, I think. So yeah, I think that's definitely a difference between, all demon bad banish,
Mhm.
but compared to that with the polong and palisade. So that's an interesting topic of discussion, I think.
Yeah, they can be used for good as well. They can be used for profit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily. And it's also for my story, it was very much pushing against that the what do they call it, the model citizen, the thinking of Asians as the
Mm.
model citizen, where we're expected to be good and kind and polite, and but then we're just people and we have
Yeah.
monstrous aspects to ourselves too. So just I think in a way bringing that up to light, that I I've got moments where I'm uncharitable, I'm selfish, I'm
Mhm.
mean spirited, but it's just part of being human.
That's really, really an important thing to bring up because the model minority myth is something I hate so much. It really angers me. It reduces us, to harmless. It makes us harmless.
Yeah.
It takes away our power. It just makes me so mad. So I'm very happy to see that getting addressed.
Yeah,
Only through
become
monstrosity where we find our humanity,
Yeah.
I wish people would understand that. Sorry, Genevieve, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say that's why horror people are so nice. We get we get the monstrous stuff out.
Healthy. Gosh, well, I know we could talk about this stuff for literally hours and hours and hours, but for sake of time, I'm going to ask each of you 2 more questions before we conclude. And let's go ahead. Let's start with Jen, if you don't mind.
Okay. Mhm.
Jen, why do you believe that monsters are so important, and why should their stories continue to be told?
I think, this goes back to just talking about, what Genevieve said earlier, that horror people were often misfits, and
Yeah,
we find we belong with the other misfits, horror
yeah.
people. And I see a lot of parallels between these spirits and monsters and myself, as being misunderstood, assumptions made about me because of my race, because of how I look, because of my gender. And that just sends me running to the monster side, to the horror side. And it's empathy. You give something a negative name, you've othered it, you've put it in a compartment now where we can just go, that's evil. And we don't have to think about it or talk about it. And we can justify our horrible behavior towards that
Yeah.
because it's a monster. And I think it's really, really important to talk about that and talk about those stories and learn that there is a backstory sometimes, and what people view as monstrous behavior is sometimes justified or is sometimes a reaction to trauma, that it's just so much more complicated than that. And those are the stories I like to tell and the stories I like to read. You call someone a monster, and again, I'm not gonna, some people are monsters. We all know that. Some people are horrible people who are selfish and want to harm others. But, again, a lot of times women, a woman who asserts herself, who stands up, who has confidence, or, who shows her power and pushes back against something negative or any kind of trauma or horrible thing done to her. Well, she's a monster now. She's acted out of turn. She wasn't polite. Those are things she's not supposed to be. And we need to bring that into the open. We need to tell those stories because we're, again, the model minority myth. There you go. We're not supposed to react negatively. We're not supposed to get mad. We're not supposed to do terrible things. And it always means a lot to me when I see that blown open, when I see, like Beef. I don't know if anybody saw that series on
Oh yeah.
Netflix, but yeah, oh my God, that made me so happy. I was like, yeah, they're behaving badly. See,
Yeah.
like everybody else,
Yeah. Oh, so well said. Absolutely. I love how much your heart has shown, Jen. I think obviously in your writing, but I think in your exploration of monstrosity, and again, it gives so many other people such a safe space when people let us explore monstrosity that way.
Yeah, you can see yourself. I think a lot
Yeah.
of us, any of us who's, felt like a misfit, felt misunderstood, we see a piece of ourself in a lot of monsters, and that makes you have empathy towards it and makes you love
Yeah.
it, and you start to see yourself that way too, and maybe you start to see when it's wrongly used negatively and when it can be a good thing.
Definitely. Absolutely. Well, Genevieve, how about yourself? Why do you think monsters are so important?
I do agree with what Jen said, but I also think monsters can be a way for us um, to survive, because horror is a very, I think, honest genre. It sees the dark and the light, and also it gives us, when we hold something up as monstrous, it gives us something to maybe focus on, or even just for the time that you're reading about it or watching it or whatever, to externalize some of the anxieties and fears and things. And every time there is some sort of negative event in history, horror booms. Horror's having a renaissance right now because we're going through some trying times. And
Yeah.
I think monsters give us a way to cope with that, whether or not it's that catharsis of watching something that is just like a horror comedy, like Cocaine Bear, where it's just ridiculousness, or if it's something very political, like Get Out. It is a way for us to think about horrible things. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's in a weird way, and yes, it's terrifying, but it's nice to digest it that way. It feels better. It feels easier on the body sometimes when you can just, you know. Well said. Well, Chris, how about yourself? Why do you think monsters are so important?
Well, Jen and Genevieve gave such thoughtful and comprehensive answers, so I'm not
Oh
sure
yeah.
if I have that much to add. I think monsters are important because they're fun to talk about. Monster stories are fun. Ever since we've been drawing, on the cave walls as hunter gatherers, we've been thinking about monsters. Folklore, tradition, spooky stories about monsters in the mountains that's been passed down for thousands of years, and I think will continue for as long as we exist to tell stories. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's a lot of fun. I think that's why it's important.
It's fun to get scared, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Oh
think
yeah,
that is true. It's a silly feeling. It's a nostalgic feeling.
yeah, yeah. There's actual
And
people out there hunting Bigfoot, so people find it interesting. That's for sure.
exactly. It gives you, it makes you feel alive,
Mm,
to
mm,
just like feel fear sometimes
yeah,
is just so warm in a
mm,
strange way.
mm, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's also fun to scare other people.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure you all have had beautiful experiences with that. I'm sure. I'm sure. And maybe some you'll never know, but that you truly terrified, which is
Mm.
pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. All right. Well, last question. Jen, well, yeah, no, let's start with Jen. I think so. Jen. Say you're just chilling, you're just relaxing, having a lovely afternoon, if you will. And all of a sudden, the Maynok appears in front of you. What would you do in that situation? What would you say? How would you react?
I'd offer her a seat. I think she'd be a friend. I'd want to talk to
Yes.
her. I would definitely tell her I see you. I know you're misunderstood and I don't blame you at all. I, you
Mm.
know, we all do terrible things. You were grieving, and I'd ask her too if she ever got that other life.
Oh,
If she ever got the other life where she got her family.
That's so beautiful. And I love that you're even then, giving a space, creating a space, giving her the ability to finally have her own narrative for once in that way, right? Like, you tell us, you talk, you go. What do you need?
Yeah. Because I think she never really got to tell her story, obviously. She was grieving and she got trapped in a jar or a waistband, depending on which
Yeah,
person you believe. She could still be
exactly.
in the royal palace behind glass right now. I have
Yes.
no idea.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love it. Beautiful choice. Well, Chris, same situation. Say you're relaxing, having a
Hmm.
lovely day, or maybe asleep, what
Hmm.
have you, and say the Gawi Nulim presents themselves to you in whatever form you decide.
Right.
Okay, what do you think you would do in that situation?
Well, I certainly won't be able to speak. I won't be. I won't be able to move.
Sorry,
The fingers. You can just
the
be moving your
I'll start
fingers.
fingers.
twitching my fingers trying to break free. But whatever it presents me with, I've experienced it enough to know that in the morning I'll be awake and fine. So I'll just try not to be scared too much. That's what
Aw,
I'll do.
Mhm.
I love it. I love the idea of just experiencing it, which is tough and requires a lot of bravery. It really does.
Well, it requires a little curiosity, that's for sure. not not sure about the bravery part, but yeah,
The curiosity helps, I
yeah.
think, a little bit.
Mm.
Alrighty, well, Genevieve, same situation. You're relaxing, having a beautiful day, and all of a sudden, the Polong and the Pelisit present themselves in some way to you. What would you say? What would you do in that situation?
I kind of feel like they're almost like a genie creature, like
Hmm.
that they've been summoned or captured somehow or created, and then they have no freedom. So I would just open that bottle and I would let them be free, because I feel like that maybe they're just a part of the natural supernatural world, and
Mm.
they've been harnessed, they've been trapped and forced to do or to harm people or for profit, but maybe they
Mm.
just want to go and hang out. Maybe they just
Yeah.
want to go and live their little lives somewhere. So that's what I would do. I would say, just open the bottle and let them free.
That's so wonderful and so kind. And you're absolutely right. They've been, everybody says they control people, but maybe they have been the ones who have been controlled all along. So that's beautiful that you give them that chance to be themselves and to think for themselves for once.
Yeah, because my story is kind of about exploitation and colonialism. So maybe that's that's their story as well. So it's like, go and be a little free little naked lady and your little pet
Yeah.
grasshopper. Go live your best lives,
Yes.
whatever that is.
That's so beautiful. Ah, gosh. Well, thank you all so much for such an incredible freaking conversation today. Again, I know we could talk about this stuff probably for days on end, and I'm just so thrilled for each of your stories to come out. Shout out to Silk and Sinew, to Kristy, to Bad Hand Books, the whole nine. Keep an eye out for May, everybody, because this book is about to be the best thing you've ever read. I have no problem saying that. I know it's true. Um, but thank you each so much for sharing such beautiful knowledge and folklore and monstrosity, and of course, each of your hearts with us today. I really appreciate you.
Thanks,
Thank
Camille.
you.
Thanks, Camille, for having us. And yeah, I can't wait to read these stories now. I'm
Yeah,
really curious.
I'm gonna try and pick what's the true part in yours, Chris.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I know. I feel like we're gonna have to have another episode, like a part two after the book comes out, just to like discuss everybody's
Yeah,
stories.
yeah. Have a debrief. Yeah.
Yeah, debrief.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly.
This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Acosta. A monstrous thank you to Kristy P. Kulski, Genevieve Flynn, Jen, or J.A.W. McCarthy, and Chris Hahn for such a breathtaking interview. A big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a stellar episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show is also written and produced by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in today's episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website and our socials, links in the description as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.